Abandoned girl. Fed by a human. Returned as an empress. 20 years later, blood trickled down Rex's arm as he faced the enormous, saber-toothed blue wolf, its fangs glistening in the dim light of the cavern. The beast snarled, a deep rumbling that echoed through the stone walls, but it didn't advance. Instead, it stood protectively over something small, hidden behind its massive paws. Rex tightened his grip on the crude spear, knowing one wrong move meant death. But what froze him wasn't the predator's deadly stare. It was the small blue-skinned hand that reached up to touch the wolf's thick fur. A child. A Xilian child in the den of Xilos' most feared predator. Rex had been tracking the wolf for 3 days, after barely surviving the crash of his scout ship in the uncharted wilderness of Xilos. The planet was notorious throughout the galaxy for its hostile native species and the equally hostile blue-skinned Zillians, who claimed dominion over it. The sight of a Xilian child here, deep in the wilderness, miles from any settlement, made no sense. "Easy," Rex whispered, though whether to the wolf or himself, he wasn't sure. 20 years of wilderness survival across 5 different frontier planets hadn't prepared him for this. The child, a girl he could now see, was perhaps 3 or 4 years old, with tangled dark hair against her blue skin and eyes that reflected the bioluminescent fungi clinging to the cave walls. She showed no fear of the massive predator. Even more incredibly, she showed no signs of injury. The wolf growled again, lowering its massive head to nuzzle the child. Rex's mind raced. Had the wolf adopted her? Impossible. These creatures were apex predators that had torn apart 3 colonial expeditions before the Galactic Union declared Xilos off-limits to human settlement. A distant howl echoed outside the cave. The wolf's ears perked up, and for a brief moment, its attention shifted. Rex didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, spear extended not toward the wolf, but toward the ground beside it, creating enough distraction to dive past its massive form. He scooped up the child and rolled toward the opposite wall of the cave. The wolf roared, its fury shaking loose dust from the ceiling. It charged, but Rex had already pushed himself and the girl into a narrow crevice in the rock wall, too small for the massive predator to follow. The beast clawed frantically at the opening, its hot breath blasting into the tight space. The girl didn't scream or cry. Instead, she made soft cooing sounds toward the wolf, reaching her tawny blue hand toward it. Rex pulled her back, heart pounding. "No," he whispered. "That's not your mother." The child turned to him, her eyes unnervingly calm. She tilted her head, studying him with a curiosity that seemed far too mature for her age. Her blue skin had a slight luminescent quality in the darkness, a trait of the Xilian species that Rex had only heard about in traders' tales. Rex shifted his weight, wincing at the pain from his injured leg, a parting gift from the crash landing. The narrow passage continued deeper into the mountain. Their only chance was to find another way out. "I'm going to call you Elara," he said softly as he began to edge backward, keeping the girl close to his chest. "It means shining light in the old tongue. Because you're alive when you shouldn't be, little one." That was 20 years ago. Now, Rex crouched in the undergrowth, watching Elara move silently through the dense blue foliage of the Xilian jungle. At 23, she had grown into a formidable woman, lean and strawy. Her dark hair braided tightly against her blue scalp, her skin a deeper azure than most Xilians, weathered by years under the alien sun. The crude leather armor she wore blended with the shadows, and the bow in her hands was a deadly extension of her will. Beside her padded shadow, a fully grown saber-toothed wolf, whose shoulders stood as high as Elara's chest. The beast was the offspring of the very wolf Rex had taken Elara from all those years ago. But unlike its parent, Shadow had known Elara since birth. The massive predator obeyed her, with an almost supernatural devotion. "The Xilian patrol is heading west," Rex said in the silent language of hands he had taught her when she was small. "Human voices carried too far in this wilderness. 15 warriors, all armed." Elara nodded, her fingers moving rapidly. "They are cutting deeper into the territory than ever before. Shadow smells their burning tools." Rex grimaced. The Xilian Emperor, Draz'Kul, had been expanding his territory aggressively over the past year, burning and clearing the ancient forests that had stood for millennia. The Zillians, despite sharing the planet with countless other species, considered themselves the rightful rulers of the world that bore their name. They tolerated no competition, whether from the indigenous wildlife or the handful of human castaways who had managed to survive in the wilderness. "We should avoid them," Rex sighed. At 63, he was still strong, but he knew his limits. "There will be more where they came from." Elara's eyes narrowed, and she gestured toward a ridge to the north. Rex followed her gaze and saw what she had already sensed, a plume of dark smoke rising above the tree line. "They're burning the sacred grove," she sighed, her movements sharp with anger. "The pack's cubs are sheltered there." Rex felt his stomach tighten. The pack wasn't just Shadow and his mate. Over the years, Elara had developed an extraordinary connection to the wildlife of Xilos. What had begun as a curious affinity between a lost child and a predator had evolved into something unprecedented. Animals that would tear each other apart would stand side by side in her presence. Predator and prey alike responded to her subtle commands, communicated through body language so refined it bordered on telepathy. Rex had nurtured this gift, teaching her everything he knew about animal behavior from his years as a wilderness guide. He'd shown her how to interpret the subtle shifts in posture that signaled aggression or submission, how to use scent and sound to establish dominance, how to recognize the hierarchies that governed pack behavior. But Elara had taken these lessons far beyond anything Rex could have imagined. She had united the most dangerous predators of the northern continent into a cohesive force, a super pack that followed her lead. The blue-furred dire wolves, the six-legged marsh cats, even the solitary spine-backed hunters that stalked the high plateaus, all acknowledged her as their alpha. "We can't fight the Zillians directly," Rex sighed. "They have weapons we can't match." Elara's response was quick and decisive. "We don't need to match their weapons. We just need to make them understand fear." Before Rex could object, she placed 2 fingers in her mouth and released a whistle that modulated in pitch and rhythm, a sound that carried for miles through the dense jungle. Shadow threw back his massive head and added his howl to her call. The response was immediate. Howls, roars, and screeches erupted from all directions as the creatures of the wilderness answered their leader's summons. Rex gripped his spear tighter. After 2 decades on this brutal planet, he knew better than to question Elara's judgment when it came to the wild. He had raised her, taught her to speak, to hunt, to survive. But in many ways, the wilderness had claimed her as its own. Despite her Xilian blood, she was neither fully of the civilized world nor fully wild. She existed at the intersection, understanding both in ways no one else could. "What's your plan?" he sighed. Elara's smile was fierce. "We show them that they are not the apex predators they believe themselves to be." Commander Vex'Tor led his forest-clearing expedition with the confidence of a Xilian warrior born to rule. His blue skin, marked with the ceremonial scars of his rank, glistened with sweat as he supervised the destruction of another section of the primitive forest. The Emperor's orders were clear: expand the agricultural territories, push back the wilderness, and eliminate any resistance, whether from the beasts that infested the forests or the occasional human vermin that had somehow survived on their sacred world. "Push the line forward, another 100 paces," he ordered. watching with satisfaction as his soldiers used their flame tools to clear the dense undergrowth. The Xilians didn't need advanced energy weapons for this work. Their metallurgy was superior to anything the humans had brought to their world, and their curved blades and fire spitters were more than adequate for subduing the wilderness. "Commander!" One of his scouts rushed into the clearing, his normally composed features tight with alarm. "Something approaches from the north," Vex'Tor sneered. "Animals fleeing the fire. Let them run. They'll make easy targets." The scout shook his head. "Not fleeing, sir. Advancing, organized. Many species together, moving as reason." A murmur of unease passed through the Xilian soldiers. Such behavior was unnatural. Animals did not cooperate across species lines. "Superstitious nonsense," Vex'Tor spat. "Form a defensive line. Whatever comes, we will." His words died in his throat as the jungle parted before them. A saber-toothed wolf, larger than any he had ever seen, stalked into the clearing. Its blue fur was streaked with gray, and its eyes burned with an intelligence that sent a primitive shiver down the commander's spine. But it was the figure beside the beast that truly froze his blood. A Xilian female, her blue skin a shade darker than any he had seen, armed with nothing but a bow and a crude knife at her hip, walked with the confidence of an empress. Behind her emerged a nightmare. Dozens of predators that should have been tearing each other apart instead moved in eerie coordination. Six-legged marsh cats slunk alongside spine-backed hunters. Winged raptors perched on the shoulders of dire wolves. The entire deadly menagerie of Xilos' northern wilds had assembled into an army. And all eyes, fanged, furred, scald, and Zillian, were fixed on the soldiers. "What abomination is this?" Vex'Tor hissed, raising his blade. The Xilian woman stepped forward, addressing him in perfect, unaccented language. "I am Elara, Alpha of the northern wilds. You burn our homes. You threaten our young. This ends today." Vex'Tor recovered his composure and laughed. "A savage presumes to challenge the Emperor's will. Your pets are impressive, girl, but they will die before our blades just as easily as any beast." His eyes narrowed as he studied her unusual appearance. "What clan spawned such a wild thing as you?" The woman, Aara, didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head in a gesture reminiscent of the predators at her side. "I claim no clan but the wilderness," she said calmly. "And this is not a challenge. This is a demonstration." She raised her hand in a simple gesture, and the world exploded into chaos. Rex watched from the ridge as Elara's demonstration unfolded. He had argued against this confrontation, but she had been adamant. The Xilians would never stop their expansion unless given reason to fear the consequences. And fear was what Elara intended to teach them today. Her strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. The predators did not attack directly. That would have led to a slaughter on both sides. Instead, they executed a precisely choreographed display of overwhelming force. The massive wolves charged and withdrew, herding the Xilian soldiers into tighter formations. The spine-backed hunters leaped over their defensive line, landing behind them before disappearing back into the jungle, creating confusion and panic. The marsh cats targeted the flame tools, knocking them from Xilian hands before retreating. It was not a battle. It was a message, written in primal fear. A pair of winged hunters swooped down from above, their talons extended. The Xilian archers raised their weapons, but the birds veered at the last moment, snatching bows and quivers instead of attacking the soldiers themselves. A soldier lunged at one of the wolves with his blade, only to find himself face to face with three more that materialized from the undergrowth, forcing him back into the ranks. Vex'Tor bellowed orders, trying to rally his troops into a counterattack, but each time they attempted to form up, new waves of predators would appear from unexpected directions, scattering their formations. What made the assault particularly unnerving was its precision. Claws that could easily disembowel a man, instead slashed at weapon straps. Fangs that could crush bone merely tore away armor piece. Rex had seen Elara train for this moment for years. She had spent countless hours learning to communicate her intentions to different species, developing a complex system of whistles, gestures, and body movements that transcended the natural barriers between predators. What the Zillians were witnessing was not magic or technology. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent understanding the language of the wild. At the center of it all stood Elara, bow drawn but not fired, directing the flow of beasts with subtle shifts in her posture and periodic whistles that cut through the chaos. Shadow remained at her side, a living shield against any Zillian brave enough to approach her. None did. Within minutes, the Zillian formation had collapsed. Several soldiers fled back toward their settlement, while others cowered, weapons abandoned. Commander Vex'Tor alone maintained his position, his ceremonial blade held before him, as he faced Elara across the trampled clearing. "What manner of demon are you?" he demanded, his voice cracking with the first hints of fear. "You have the skin of our people, but move like the beasts." Elara lowered her bow and approached him, Shadow padding silently beside her. The other animals maintained their positions, creating a living barrier around the clearing. "I am what your people made me," she replied. "A child of Xilos, belonging to neither civilization nor wilderness completely. A human father taught me to survive. Your wilderness taught me to thrive." She stopped just beyond the reach of his blade. "Take a message to your Emperor, Commander. The northern wilds are under my protection. Every tree you burn, every animal you slaughter will be answered tenfold. Your settlements will find no peace, not from beasts that crawl by night, or birds that strike from above." Rex moved silently through the undergrowth, positioning himself to intervene if necessary. He knew Elara was taking a tremendous risk. If the Zillians recovered from their shock and attacked en masse, even her pack might not be able to protect her. "The Emperor will send an army," Vex'Tor warned, though his blade had lowered slightly. "Your beasts, impressive as they are, cannot stand against the might of Xilos." Elara's smile was cold. "Perhaps. But before that army arrives, your family will sleep unprotected tonight, as will the families of every soldier and noble in your capital. Do your children know the sound a marsh cat makes when it hunts in darkness? They will learn." Rex recognized the strategy. Elara had no intention of harming Zillian children, but the threat alone would sow terror more effectively than any direct attack. It was psychological warfare at its most primal. Vex'Tor's blade lowered further, his eyes darting between the assembled predators. "What do you want, witch?" "Respect," Elara said simply. "The wilderness has existed for millennia before your people learned to forge metal. It will exist long after your empire has returned to dust. Learn to live alongside it, not against it." She gestured to the still smoldering edge of the forest. "Take your wounded and go. When next we meet, it will either be as peaceful neighbors or bitter enemies. The choice belongs to your Emperor." For a long moment, Rex thought the commander might attack, despite the overwhelming odds. Instead, the Zillians slowly backed away, barking orders to his remaining troops. They gathered their injured and retreated, casting fearful glances at the assembled predators. As the last Zillian disappeared into the jungle, Elara released a long, modulated whistle. The animals responded immediately, melting back into the wilderness, until only she and Shadow remained in the clearing. Rex emerged from his hiding place, studying his adopted daughter, with a mixture of pride and concern. "That was reckless," he sighed. "It was necessary," she replied with her hands. "They needed to see that the wilderness is not simply an obstacle to be overcome. It is a power to be respected." Rex nodded slowly. "What happens when they return with reinforcements?" Elara's expression hardened. Then we show them that today was mercy, not weakness. She turned to face the direction of the Xilian capital, visible only as a distant smudge on the horizon. Their emperor believes himself the master of this world. He's about to learn otherwise. Emperor Draz'Kul of Xilos was not accustomed to fear. His ancestors had subjugated this world 3 centuries ago, establishing dominance over its savage wilderness through superior intelligence and the divine right of the blue-skinned to rule all they surveyed. The throne room of his capital city, with its towering spires of polished stone and ceremonial fire pits, was designed to inspire awe and submission in all who entered. Yet as Commander Vex'Tor knelt before him, recounting the encounter in the forest, Draz'Kul felt an unfamiliar chill creep along his spine. "A Xilian female raised in the wild," he interrupted, "controlling beasts that have never been tamed. You expect me to believe this tale?" Vex'Tor kept his head bowed, the traditional pose of a warrior accepting his failure. "I witnessed it with my own eyes, Divine One." The animals moved as one force, responding to her commands as soldiers would to a general. "We lost 3 men to injuries, but it could have been far worse. She was demonstrating her power, not exercising it fully." The emperor rose from his ornate throne, his ceremonial armor catching the light from the fire pits. "What clan does she claim? What markings did she bear?" "None, Divine One. Her skin was darker blue than any I have seen, marked only by the wilderness. She claimed no clan, only the forest itself. And she spoke of being raised by a human." "A human?" Draz'Kul's voice was sharp with disgust. "Humans are vermin, survivors of crashed ships and failed expeditions. They hide in caves and forage like animals." "This one seems different," Vex'Tor said cautiously. The wild woman spoke of him as her father. The emperor paced the length of his throne room, his mind racing, seeing a Xilian child, lost or abandoned, raised by a human survivor, and somehow forming a bond with the beasts of the wild. It sounds like a myth, not a report from my most trusted commander. Murmurs of alarm spread through the assembled nobles and warriors. Draz'Kul silenced them with a gesture. "She threatened our families, our children," Vex'Tor added, not with direct violence, but with the promise that nowhere would be safe from her beasts. An elder counselor stepped forward, his blue skin faded with age. "There are legends, Divine One, of lost children who found their way into the deepest wilds. Most perish quickly, but occasionally, one adapts. The ancient texts speak of those who learned the language of beasts." Superstition, Draz'Kul dismissed. No Xilian could command a saber wolf or a spion hunter. These are apex predators that bow to no one. "Yet they bowed to her," Vex'Tor said quietly, "and she claimed dominion over the northern wilds." The emperor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "No one claims dominion over any part of Xilos except me." He turned to his war chief. "Prepare the army. We will crush this upstart and her pet animals. The expansion continues as planned." As the council dispersed to carry out his orders, Draz'Kul remained alone on his throne, troubled by thoughts he would never admit aloud. The planet of Xilos had been full of mysteries before his ancestors arrived. Ancient ruins, unexplained phenomena, creatures that defied conventional understanding. Most had been subjugated or destroyed, but occasionally something emerged from the wilderness that reminded the Xilians that their conquest was incomplete. This female, this Elara, was such a reminder. And for the first time in many years, Emperor Draz'Kul felt uncertainty about the outcome of a conflict. "They're mobilizing for war," Rex told Elara as they stood atop the highest ridge overlooking the vast expanse of the northern wilds. "My contacts in the border settlements say the Emperor has called in troops from all provinces." In the 20 years since the crash, Rex had established cautious relationships with a few Xilian outcasts and traitors who operated on the fringes of their society. These tenuous connections provided valuable intelligence about the movements of the Emperor. Elara nodded, unsurprised. How many? Thousands? More than we've ever seen gathered in one force. She absently stroked Shadow's massive head as she considered this information. The huge wolf leaned into her touch, his 6-inch fangs gleaming in the late afternoon light. We expected this, she sighed. They cannot allow a challenge to go unanswered. Rex studied her face, searching for signs of doubt or fear. He found none. The little blue-skinned girl he had rescued from the wolf den had grown into a woman of extraordinary capability and confidence. Sometimes, especially in moments like this, he barely recognized the quiet child who had once clung to him for protection. This isn't just about territory anymore, he warned. The Emperor will want to make an example of you. If we're captured, Elara interrupted with a sharp gesture. We won't be. She turned to face the wilderness that had been her true home. Below them stretched miles of dense blue-green forest, intersected by winding rivers and rocky outcroppings. To the untrained eye, it appeared chaotic and hostile. To Elara, it was a complex ecosystem of allies and resources. For 20 years you taught me to survive in this wilderness, she signed to Rex. You showed me how to track, how to hunt, how to read the language of the wild. But you also taught me about humanity, about compassion, strategy, and the balance between different peoples. Rex nodded slowly. He had shared everything he knew with her. Stories of Earth and its colonies, the rise and fall of civilizations, the art of war and diplomacy. Using scraps salvaged from his crashed ship, he had taught her to read and write in the human tongue, even as she taught him the nuances of her native Zillian language. The Emperor believes himself invincible because he's never encountered an enemy who understands both worlds, Elara continued. He sees the wild as mindless because he can't interpret its communication. She smiled, a fierce expression that transformed her features. I am neither fully of civilization nor animal, but I understand both. That is our advantage. Rex couldn't argue with her logic, but concern still gnawed at him. What's your plan? Elara turned toward the setting sun, her expression resolute. The Emperor expects us to hide in the wilderness, to fight a defensive battle against superior numbers. Instead, we will take the fight to him. She whistled, and a winged raptor descended from the ski-ice, landing gracefully on her outstretched arm. The bird's razor-sharp beak could tear through leather armor with ease, and its wingspan cast a shadow over both of them. Send the call, she told the bird in a series of soft clicks and whistles. All packs, all territories, tonight we hunt. As the raptor took flight, carrying her message to the furthest reaches of the wilderness, Elara turned back to Rex. The Emperor believes he is the apex predator of this world, she sighed. By dawn, he will understand his mistake. The Xilian army assembled on the edge of the northern wilds at dusk, their polished armor reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. 5,000 warriors, the elite of the Emperor's forces, prepared to march into the wilderness with flame tools and bladed weapons. Emperor Draz'Kul himself led the expedition, his ornate battle armor and ceremonial headdress, marking him as the supreme authority. We advance in tight formation, he instructed his generals. Flame bearers at the perimeter, archers behind them, blade warriors in the center. No beast, no matter how fierce, can penetrate such a defense. The generals nodded their agreement, though unease rippled through their ranks. The stories of the wild woman and her army of beasts had spread throughout the capital, growing more fantastic with each telling. Some claimed she could transform into animals herself. Others insisted she commanded not just beasts, but the trees and rivers as well. Divine One, ventured one of the older generals. Perhaps we should wait until daylight. The wilderness is treacherous enough by day. We attack now, Draz'Kul cut him off. The darkness will conceal our approach, and these animals, however well trained, will be confused by our torches and flame tools. As the army began its advance into the dense forest, the Emperor remained confident. He had spent his entire reign expanding Xilian territory, pushing back the wilderness meter by meter, year by year. This upstart and her trained pets were simply the latest obstacle to be overcome. The first sign that something was wrong came an hour into their march. The forest, normally alive with sounds, had fallen completely silent. No calls of night birds, no rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth. Just the crunch of Xilian boots on the forest floor and the crackle of their torches. "Hold," the Emperor commanded, raising his hand. The army stopped as one, senses straining against the unnatural quiet. Then, from all directions at once, came a sound that chilled even the bravest Xilian warrior to the bone. A harmonic howling that started low and built to a blood-curdling crescendo. It wasn't the call of a single species, but a chorus of predators, their voices blending in impossible harmony. "Defensive formation," Draz'Kul ordered, but his voice sounded small against the wall of sound surrounding them. From the darkness beyond their torchlight, thousands of eyes reflected the flames, some at ground level, others high in the trees, still others moving rapidly through the undergrowth. The army closed ranks, flame tools thrust outward into the night. But the attack, when it came, defied all Xilian military doctrine. The ground beneath the rear guard suddenly collapsed, a hidden pit trap covered with vegetation. As soldiers fell, screaming, marsh cats leaped across the gap, targeting the flame bearers. Their attacks were precise, not killing blows but disabling strikes that sent the flame tools spinning into the darkness. Simultaneously, from the canopy above, winged raptors descended in coordinated strikes, their talons ripping through the ceremonial headdresses of officers, blinding them temporarily, but inflicting minimal actual harm. "Stand firm," the Emperor roared, drawing his ceremonial blade. "They are just beasts." But these beasts fought with a strategy no animal should possess. The larger predators, dire wolves and saber-tooths, harried the flanks of the formation, forcing it to compress further. Spine hunters darted in and out, their attacks targeting weapons rather than warriors. Within minutes, the carefully organized Xilian formation had become a tightly packed mass of confused soldiers, many disarmed, none seriously injured, but all increasingly terrified. A massive bull-dire wolf charged directly at the Emperor's personal guard, scattering them with its ferocity. 3 warriors tried to intercept it, their blades flashing in the torchlight. The wolf dodged with impossible agility, then snapped its jaws around one soldier's weapon arm, not biting down fully, but applying just enough pressure to force him to drop his blade with a cry of pain. Before the other 2 could respond, the wolf had vanished back into the darkness. Throughout the forest, the scene repeated itself with different predators. A 6-legged marsh cat leaped onto a flame-bearer's back, its weight driving him to his knees before it bounded away, leaving him shaken but largely unharmed. A flock of needle-beaked birds swarmed a unit of archers, their wings creating such confusion that the soldiers fired wildly into the air, wasting their arrows. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack stopped. The eyes withdrew into the darkness. The howling ceased. An unnatural silence descended once more. "What game is this?" Draz'Kul demanded of the night. "Face me, witch." His answer came not from the darkness, but from within his own ranks. A disturbance spread through the compressed mass of warriors as they parted. Unwillingly, before an advancing figure, Elara walked calmly through the heart of the Xilian army, untouched and unhindered. Shadow padded beside her, his massive form causing even veteran warriors to scramble out of his path. Behind them came Rex, bow ready but not drawn, his weathered human face a stark contrast to the blue-skinned soldiers surrounding them. The soldiers who tried to intercept them found themselves suddenly confronted by snarling predators that materialized from the shadows, only to disappear again once the trio had passed. It was as if an invisible corridor had opened through the heart of the Xilian force, leading directly to their emperor. Draz'Kul found himself face to face with the woman who had dared to challenge his authority. Up close, she was even more disconcerting. Her blue skin was deeper in hue than any Zillian he had seen. Her eyes reflected the torchlight like those of a predator, and her movements had the fluid grace of a hunting cat. "Emperor Draz'Kul," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of one who learned the formal language late. "You have entered my territory uninvited and with hostile intent. Yet not one of your warriors has been killed. Remember that." The emperor raised his blade. "Your parlor tricks and trained animals do not impress me. You stand in the heart of my army. One word from me and you die." Elara tilted her head in that unsettling animal gesture. "Look around you, Emperor. Your army is surrounded, disarmed, and afraid. They could rush us, yes, and many would die before your superior numbers prevailed. But ask yourself, would you be among the survivors?" For the first time, Draz'Kul felt the cold touch of personal fear. This woman had walked unhindered through 5,000 of his best warriors. The massive saber wolf at her side could tear out his throat before any guard could intervene. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice steady, despite his growing unease. "The same thing I told your commander," Elara replied. "Respect for the wilderness and those who dwell within it. An end to the burning of the ancient forests. Recognition of the northern wilds as a sovereign territory." Draz'Kul's eyes narrowed. "You ask me to surrender territory that is rightfully mine." "I ask you to acknowledge territory that was never yours to claim," she countered. "Your people have lived on this world for 3 centuries. The wilderness has existed for millions of years. Its claim predates yours by eons." "And if I refuse?" Draz'Kul asked. Elara's expression didn't change, but the saber wolf at her side growled, a deep rumble that vibrated through the ground. "Then the wilderness will reclaim what is its own, one settlement at a time," she said quietly. "Not through open war. Your weapons would eventually prevail against tooth and claw, but through 1,000 small terrors. Your people would never know safety again. Crops would fail, livestock would vanish, children would hear hunting calls in the night." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And you, Emperor Draz'Kul, would never sleep soundly again. Every shadow would hold a threat. Every unfamiliar sound would freeze your blood. You would build walls higher and burn lights brighter, but the fear would remain, because you would know in your heart that the wilderness is patient, and it never forgets an enemy." The emperor stared into her predator's eyes and saw the truth in her words. This woman wasn't threatening him with conventional warfare affair. She was promising a psychological campaign that would unravel the very fabric of Xilian society. For the first time in his reign, Emperor Draz'Kul considered compromise. Dawn broke over the northern wilds, painting the Xian shades of amber and violet. On a flat expanse of rock overlooking the forest, 2 figures stood eyeing each other. Emperor Draz'Kul in his ceremonial armor, Elara in her simple leather garments. Between them lay a crude map drawn in charcoal on a stretched hide. "The boundary follows the eastern river to the foothills, then along the ridge to the ancient stone formations," Elara was saying, her finger tracing the proposed border. "All the land north and west of this line belongs to the wilderness." Draz'Kul studied the map with a frown. "You claim nearly 1/3 of my empire." "I claim no Xilian settlements, no established farmland," she corrected. "Only the unkeyed wilderness that your people have been steadily destroying." land that sustains the very air you breathe. Rex watched from a respectful distance, still amazed at how events had unfolded. The night's demonstration had achieved what he had thought impossible, bringing the Emperor of Xilos to a negotiating table. The Xilian army had withdrawn to a safe distance, while Elara's pack maintained a loose perimeter around the meeting place. "And who governs this territory?" Draz'Kul demanded. "You." "A single female?" Elara shook her head. "The wilderness governs itself, as it always has. I am merely its voice, its translator to those who cannot hear its language." "Pretty words," the Emperor scoffed. "But territories require rulers. If not you, then who?" Elara considered this for a moment. "If you require a title to address in your official documents, then yes, call me the Alpha of the Northern Wilds. The beasts already do." The Emperor's expression was unreadable. "You realize that more humans will come. Perhaps not soon, but eventually. They always do. What then?" "Then they will learn, as my father did, that this world does not belong to any single species," Elara replied. "Those who respect the balance will be welcomed. Those who seek to dominate will face the same choice I offer you now." Draz'Kul was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between the map and the woman before him. Rex tensed, prepared for the negotiations to collapse. The Emperor's pride had been wounded, his authority challenged. Such men rarely accepted compromise gracefully. But when Draz'Kul spoke, his words surprised them all. "My ancestors believed they conquered this world," he said slowly. "They taught us that the blue-skinned were destined to rule all they surveyed. But the oldest texts, the ones kept only in the imperial archives, tell a different story." He looked up at the canopy of trees stretching into the distance. "They speak of finding a world already tamed by unknown hands, of ruins and artifacts suggesting civilizations far older than our own, of creatures that defied understanding." Elara remained silent, allowing him to continue. "Perhaps," the Emperor said, "Xilos was never truly ours to claim. Perhaps we are merely the latest in a long line of caretakers." He turned back to her. "I will grant your wilderness its sovereignty, Alpha Elara. Not because I fear your beasts, though they are indeed formidable, but because your challenge has awakened questions long dormant in our collective memory." He placed his hand on the map, a formal gesture of agreement. "The Northern Wilds will be recognized as a sovereign territory. No Zillian shall burn its forests or hunt its creatures without permission. In return, your subjects will respect our established boundaries." Elara placed her hand beside his. "Agreed. And should threats arise that endanger both our realms, we will stand together against them." As the Emperor nodded his assent, Rex felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For 20 years he had raised Elara in constant fear of discovery, of confrontation with the Zillians. Now, in a single night, she had achieved not just safety but recognition. Not just saber-tooths, but sovereignty. The blue-skinned girl he had rescued from a wolf's den had indeed returned as an empress, not of humans or Zillians, but of the wild itself. 6 months later, Rex stood at the entrance to the cave that had been their home for the past 15 years. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground. At 63, his body bore the scars and aches of a life spent in the wilderness, but his eyes were clear and alert as ever. Shadows mate, and 3 half-grown cubs lounged nearby, their blue fur gleaming in the patches of sunlight. The younger wolves had never known fear of humans or Zillians. They had been born into Elara's pack, raised with her scent in their nostrils from their first breath. The sound of approaching footsteps made Rex reach for his spear out of habit, but he relaxed when he recognized the familiar pattern. Elara emerged from the forest path, her blue skin adorned with symbols of her status. Bones and teeth from predators that had died natural deaths, feathers freely given by the raptors that served as her messengers. The southern border is secure, she signed as she approached. The Zillians have withdrawn their outposts as agreed. Rex nodded approvingly. And the new trading post? Operational, she replied. 3 Xilian families have settled there. They seem genuinely interested in learning about the wilderness, rather than conquering it. It was a small beginning, but a significant one. After centuries of viewing the wilderness as an enemy to be subdued, some Xilians were beginning to see it through new eyes, as a complex ecosystem to be understood and respected. I brought something for you, Elara said, reaching into a pouch at her waist. She withdrew a small device that Rex recognized immediately, a portable data unit from his crashed ship, long thought lost in the wreckage. Where did you find this? He asked, taking the device with reverent hands. The Xilian archives, she signed. They recovered it from your ship years ago, but couldn't access its contents. The Emperor returned it, as a gesture of goodwill. Rex activated the unit, and his eyes misted as the images appeared on its small screen. Pictures of Earth, of the colony worlds, of the family he had left behind when he signed on as a wilderness guide for the ill-fated expedition to Xilos. They're probably all gone now, he said softly. It's been over 20 years. Elara placed her hand on his shoulder. Perhaps, but their memory lives in you, and in what you've taught me. She gestured to the wilderness around them. And now, in this new beginning, between our peals and the wild, Rex smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. When I found you in that wolf den, I thought I was sawing you. I never imagined you would end up saving an entire ecosystem. You did save me, Elara replied, not just from death, but from isolation. You gave me language, history, purpose. A sudden commotion at the edge of the clearing caught their attention. One of the younger wolves had risen to its feet, ears pricked forward. A moment later, a small delegation of Xilians emerged from the forest path, led by a familiar figure, Commander Vex'Tor, now serving as the Emperor's official liaison to the northern wilds. Alpha Elara, he called, stopping at a respectful distance. The Emperor requests your presence at the capital. Troubling reports have come from the southern continent. Strange ships have been spotted entering our atmosphere. Elara exchanged a glance with Rex. They both knew what this meant. Humans were returning to Xilos, and in greater numbers than before. Tell the Emperor I will come, she replied. But I bring my advisors with me, both human and beast. Vex'Tor nodded, his expression solemn. The Emperor anticipated as much. He says that Xilos may soon need all its children, wild and civilized alike. As the commander and his escort withdrew, Rex turned to Elara. So it begins again. The cycle of confrontation. Elara's expression was determined rather than concerned. But this time we face it together. Zillian, human, and wild. That night, as they prepared for the journey to the capital, Elara stood at the mouth of their cave, looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there, more humans were coming. Perhaps as explorers, perhaps as colonists, perhaps as conquerors. Whatever their purpose, they would find Xilos changed from the records of previous expeditions. They would find a world where wilderness and civilization had reached an almost easy truce, where predator and prey moved in coordinated harmony at the command of a blue-skinned woman who belonged to both worlds and neither, where the old boundaries between species had blurred and new alliances had formed. At her feet, Shadow growled softly, sensing her tension. Elara knelt beside the massive wolf, running her fingers through his thick blue fur. Yes, my friend, she whispered, we have more battles ahead. But we've shown them once what we can do. We'll show them again if needed. From the darkness of the cave, Rex watched his adopted daughter, the abandoned child he had rescued from a wolf's den, who had now become the most powerful force on Xilos. The human ships would come with their technology, their ambitions, their ignorance of this world's delicate balance. But they would find something they never expected. They would find Elara, the girl who had once been abandoned and now ruled as Empress of the Wild. And they, like the Zillians before them, would have to make a choice, to respect the balance that she protected or to challenge it at their peril. The abandoned girl, fed by a human, had returned as an empress, and her reign was just beginning.